I was like, when am I going to do this ever again? And I literally tried out like all the mics, and I was like, hey, I don't know why I bought this like Shure mic that was like very boring sounding, but I bought this AKG 214, which is like a cheap mic.
Yeah, cool.
And I was like, this sounds like really good on my voice. And I was like, okay, I'm getting this mic, And that was like, just to hear it on my voice. I never would have bought that mic had I not tried it out on my voice. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I think like knowing what I would do to my voice on other mics when I'm recording myself, like the Mojave cuts out a lot of that process for me. And yeah, the same for other people in sessions. Like I feel like the most demoralizing thing for a singer in any kind of recording or writing session is for them to record themselves and hear it back and for it to not sound good. And the Mojave just tends to make people sound good. I don't know. It's great.
It's a Swiss Army knife microphone, sounds like.
Yeah, totally.
I'll have to try it out one day.
Yeah, highly recommend. I have it in a spot in my studio where it's the vocal mic, but also you can kind of turn it on when someone's doing drums, and it's like it works really well as a room mic on drums and on guitar amps or anything really.
Amazing. And we didn't talk too much about gear, but do you have any other favorite pieces of gear? Anything that you're using regularly in the studio that, really helps you do what you need to do?
A lot of it is guitar pedals. I have a vintage Deluxe Memory Man pedal, which is just like the best sounding delay to me. And I use that pretty much on everything. A chorus echo that I love. I feel like those two kind of take care of a lot of the vocal effects on things that I'm mixing. And then, yeah, I mean, I've got like a modular setup that I feel like is really cool for textures and just kind of, weird sounds that might not be super easy to replicate in the computer. But yeah, I feel like, as I said to you before we started this, we're in lockdown at the moment in Melbourne, and I've had a week of just making stuff on my computer without any instruments or outboard effects or whatever. And I feel like for the most part, I'm able to replicate the sounds pretty well. Some kind of workflow elements might take a little bit longer, but yeah, you can pretty much do I think the plugin that I'm using the most at the moment is Sketch Cassette by Aberrant DSP, which is like a $30 cassette emulation plugin. But I feel like that's probably a bigger part of the sound at the moment than any kind of outboard gear, really.
So cool. Yeah, cassettes. I love the sound of the cassettes, or those cassette plugins. I have a free one by Calum Audio, which is super cool sounding.
Yeah,
I should really
good.
use it more.
Sketch Cassette is different. It sounds different to all of those other ones, and it has this really hectic compressor in it as well. That's just kind of got an on and off knob and a blend. But I feel like I use that.
I'll check it out.
The compressor side of it with all the cassette stuff bypassed pretty often.
Really? Nice. Yeah. I'll have to look into that.
Yeah,
that
highly
sounds
recommend.
Neat, man. Yeah. Just a couple more questions before we wrap this interview, which has been really, really fun and eye-opening for me. Looking back on your career, I know you said you feel like you're still at the beginning of it, but, you've done quite a lot. Looking back on your earlier self, like what would you, tell your previous self, like, hey, keep at that, or maybe don't do this? So what would be that one piece of advice?
I think one thing that was really awesome for me at a young age was meeting Andre, who has ended up mixing a lot of my stuff. And I think he just heard my music on SoundCloud and just sent me a message and said that if I ever needed someone to mix stuff, that he would be up for it. And I don't think I knew what mixing was at that point. And I just started sending things to him. And I think I would probably tell myself that was a really good idea to get stuff sounding as good as it possibly can and kind of approach things professionally, even at the starting point for me. But at the same time, I often wonder if I hadn't taken him up on the mixing offer, if that would have made me a better mixer, or if it would have just forced me to kind of take those things into consideration from the start, and it probably would have just sped up my mixing journey a little bit. But I don't know. I feel like...
But it might have slowed down your creative songwriting journey.
That's true. That's really true as well. I think I'm pretty happy with where I'm at the moment. Like, I feel like my life is just really really nice. I just get to spend time in the studio with my friends and make cool shit. And it's hard to know what things kind of led me to this point and which things might have hindered that. But I think I would just tell young me to just keep doing it.
Yeah, love it. And so it sounds like looking forward, mixing is going to be something that you're going to be working on, trying to do more of yourself. And have you what have you done in terms of that? Like, what have you already done, and what are you planning on doing in terms of like upping your mixing games?
I don't think I want to be a mixer. I'm not that interested in mixing things that I haven't produced at this stage, at least. Like, I feel like, but I'm just trying to do it as much as I can and just listen to things a little bit more closely and be thinking about, what kind of mixing decisions might have got things to a certain point, and also just like ask a lot of questions to people that I'm around or in contact with and just see how things that I like the sound of got to where they are.
Yeah.
And yeah, I think that I should try and mix stuff that I haven't produced at least as just a way of getting better at it. Maybe that has a bit to do with getting out of Ableton, which I've been really resistant towards for ages. But
most people I talk to on the podcast are like resistant to getting into Ableton but want to.
Well, yeah, I feel like I made my first record in GarageBand, and then Ableton was kind of like a necessary byproduct of like wanting to play electronic music live, because it kind of handles all of the playback and, interacting with electronic elements on stage and all of that. Like, I don't think there's another DAW that can do that as well. And then I think I just started producing in it because I was spending so much time in it when we were on tour, just thinking about all the live stuff. And now I feel like I really know it inside and out. Like, there's not that many aspects of that DAW that I haven't had to use in one way or another, but it's not really set up for mixing. Mixing in a kind of traditional sense where there's buses and VCAs and like the whole kind of, it's not Pro Tools basically. And I feel like over time I've been like developing a template in Ableton for myself that is kind of making it work a little bit better in that way. But yeah, that might be the thing that I need to do to like get better. Is just
super interesting.
Yeah, even just mentally, like kind of separate the two practices, like separate the mixing process from the production process. If I know that I'm going to have to stem it out from Ableton into Pro Tools or Logic or something else.
Yeah, this seems to be a big thing with people that do use Ableton is like, it's so hard to take it all out of Ableton. I talked about this recently on a couple episodes. I interviewed a guy named Daniel Aglister who co-mixed a bunch of the Noga Erez records that recently came out.
Oh,
I don't know if you know Noga.
I've heard. So I was in a session with someone the other day and they played some of her stuff for me. It sounded awesome.
Yeah, she's Israeli and her music's really blowing up. And they couldn't get the session out of Ableton, so Daniel finished the mixes like to the point that the producers could get it inside of the session, because it was just like getting this out of here is going to be impossible, So
yeah,
it's like super interesting to see that divide of. Yeah, go on. Sorry.
I think it's that way with any DAW though. If you're finishing music to like a mixed level, like, by the end of a mix in any kind of software, there's going to be, bus processing and things in groups that are being processed in a way that makes them sound completely different when it's all turned off and taken out of the group. I think back to your question earlier about stems, like I find that as my rough mixes get closer, I'm sending less stems in general. Like I'm sending big groups of things where I know that I like the sound of this number of things in that group, and it's just a matter of working with that group. And I think that, the other thing that you asked about how I find mixes and how I decide who I'm going to work with to mix stuff that I'm producing is finding people that are flexible and that are open to that way of working and open to me saying, I really like the drum blend and everything about it is exactly how I want it. And it's just, maybe like tweaking the group or, making changes to other things around the parts of the mix, of the rough mix that I really like and want to retain and carry through to the the master.
Yeah, it was sounding like that when you were talking about how like you're maybe sending like 10 stems to a mixer or something. It's like what I'm guessing. Like drums, bass, guitars, vocal. Like it sounds like it's like
But
super.
no one really
you have it dialed in.
Yeah, and no one really tells you that you can do that. And I feel like most mixers, delivery guidelines are written for people who aren't really mixing at all, or like the rough mix is quite far from where they want the finished product to be. But I think for me, I'm just kind of like wanting someone to make sure everything's fine, and be like open to kind of rebouncing things if they need, or like have it be quite a collaborative process.
Yeah, like, okay, this is working, but I need the kick drum separate so I can just get it
totally.
to sidechain a little more, that kind of thing.
I don't think that's specific to Ableton. I think like once you've got a mix like to a kind of good level in Pro Tools, it's going to be pretty hard to get it out of Pro Tools to get into another DAW.
Right. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, I've always been an advocate for getting it out of the production session, just to give, for myself, at least on the productions I'm working on, if I'm mixing it, I just want to have that objectivity of like, okay, exploring it, to get the balances and a little bit more fine tuned. But what you're saying, it's hard. It's a hard line to decide, I guess. Everybody's have to, and maybe just experiment and see, on both ways,
I think the other thing, recently, a project that I was producing, we actually sent it to Chris Waller to mix, and we were just talking about mix delivery and just all of those kind of standard questions that you would ask a mixer before making stems for them. And he said to me that in his experience, there's always something that you lose when you make stems, and that really resonated with me as well, because like often when I'm producing, I'm like I'll put some plugins on the drum group and on the mix bus and on the vocal group, and like I'm often making decisions based on how things sound when they're hitting other plugins or pedals or bits of outboard gear or whatever. And when you take all of that off, or even when you take off what's on the mix bus, like you're losing some of the energy and the intention of the production. And I feel like I'm trying really hard to convey all of that stuff in stems.
Yeah. I totally get that. I one time had to send off a mix in stems for mastering, and I was bummed out about it because I have everything hitting the stereo bus compressor, right? So, like that affects how everything's hitting it. Like if the bass and the kick and the rest of the mix are hitting the stereo bus compressor, it's going to change the way the stereo bus compressor works if I like mute some of those items. You know what I mean? Like
totally.
It's not working the same way. So there's definitely something you lose stuff. Yeah. I guess you just have to bring it back. You have to do something different. I guess it's gonna be a different vibe, I guess, when you're using the new mix.
Totally. And I feel like for every stem that's in my folder of stems, there's a screenshot of some plugins that was on the stem or on the group or something that like,
right.
Yeah. And I feel like it's pretty rare that people actually kind of go through and pull all that stuff up. But at the very least, like, want to make sure that you're not giving the mixer a disadvantage in not being able to replicate the decisions that you are making.
Yeah, totally. I actually do that when I produce and mix in Logic. So when I take my production out of the production, project in Logic and put it in the mixing project, I'll often like save a plugin chain. Yeah, and you could do that really easily in Logic of like save this chain as whatever it is, that song's bass, and then I'll put that into a bus inside the new mix in case I need to tweak something else and I don't want to tie my hands, but I want to have that vibe.
Yeah, totally.
I do that a lot actually. Yeah, there was a guy I had on the show early on named Edward Court who's in Berlin, and he does pretty crazy mixing inside of Ableton. So I think I'm going to put you guys in touch.
Yeah. Oh, I should check that out.
Yeah, I think I'll get you guys in touch.
Hell yeah.
Totally. Wow, Gab, this is a really, really fun conversation. Great to meet you.
Yeah, likewise.
And I learned a lot, so I'm sure the audience did too. What's the best way to find you, on the internet?
Just Instagram, just typing in my name and it comes up. Or my artist name, which is Japanese Wallpaper. That's there as well. I don't know. I wish I was better at the internet. I feel like I have some friends that do what I do, and their online presence is